There we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, one. I hope everyone's doing really well. I'm really delighted and honored. I have a special guest today, and I also want to introduce myself to Sunny's community as well. For everyone coming from the transformational coaching community, today I have Sunny Sharma. Sunny Sharma is the founder of personalmasteryquest.com, and he's coached individuals and helps people to dissolve their mind identification and find true peace. Sunny, thanks for being here. I'm really excited to have you on and to dive deep into consciousness work and to really what I think is the deepest level of work that we can do with another human being.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Very excited as well.
So I was thinking about where we wanted to start the conversation, and I was reflecting earlier on just coaching, on personal mastery, and really what it means to self-actualize and transform. And I know for me, I teach a particular way of coaching where there's a dissolution of the identification with your mind and your thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the identification with the thoughts, from my understanding and my experience, is that's what actually creates a made up identity, but it also creates suffering in our experience, the more that we identify with certain thoughts. Can you just share with me a little bit about your own experience and your journey and thoughts on this?
Yeah, when we say dissolving mind identification, it's a sort of term that, sometimes you're just like, what does that even mean? In the simplest way possible to define it, it's really to dissolve the belief you have in thoughts as myself, as what I am, as my voice. So thoughts which are arising spontaneously without your necessarily choosing of them. And they're always projecting all sorts of things, which again, you're not deliberately choosing.
Mm-hmm.
The belief that you have in those thoughts is what we are trying to dissolve, because it is through belief and identification that thoughts are able to pull us into what they are projecting, and therefore sort of mold our experience in accordance to those projections. So when we are sort of dissolving the belief that we have in just whatever is arising in awareness, then we are able to create this space between what I know myself to be and just the thoughts that are arising. Even though they arise so intimately as my voice, there can be this space of detachment, of discernment, where you're able to, and that space is what we call wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
That space is what we call detachment, where you're able to discard pretty much most of constant psychological thinking, which is constantly seeking to control through selfish motives. And once this belief is dissolving and the space is sort of increasing, not only do you have greater self-control, but also the thoughts that pull you into suffering and all these sorts of different directions where you waste your energy, that itself, that tendency dissipates.
Beautiful. This is really cool because there's like 4 different conversational threads that I'm seeing come up that I want to go down, but I'll just choose one. I guess the first one would be whenever I take someone through the space, and I remember for me when I started moving through that space beyond thinking and really started increasing that space between the thought and the belief of my thought. And they just started passing through, and then it was like, oh, there's so much more spaciousness all of a sudden. And when I had this experience, I didn't know it was actually happening. I didn't know how to speak to it. I didn't know how to define it. But I remember once I finally noticed that that's what was creating more peace in my life, was this spaciousness between the thoughts that I was having and just not believing that that's really true. Mm-hmm. The next thing came in and I was like, oh my God, okay, so how do I know which thoughts are real and which ones aren't? And how do I know which ones to act on and which ones I shouldn't? And I got really actually anxious because I was like, well, which thoughts do I believe? Have you seen this in your work as well?
Absolutely. It's a common thing that occurs. But here this is where you have to become subtle in your seeing, in your observation, because this anxiety that arises, this fear of, how to choose the right ones and discard the wrong ones, is itself arising as what? A certain emotion of maybe that anxiety and just another thought, which currently you are believing in as my voice.
Mm.
So you see, so this is where we must become a little subtle in our seeing. So you can say like there are thoughts which are already subtle, right? Like let's just say this object, it's just a physical object. It's a physical object of awareness.
Mhm.
Whereas a thought, it's a subtle object of awareness. It doesn't have necessary shape and form and quality, but it's clearly known. It's an object of awareness.
Mm. Mm.
There are many subtle layers of thought which are subtler than even just general thoughts which are known. So just in this case where you're like observing, okay, this thought is not myself, but then there's this other thought coming of anxiety, but this is the layer that we kind of fall into identification with. We start to believe in, okay, this is my voice. So then you're sort of falling into that projection. So what I say to anybody that brings up a question like this, because I don't it is subtle, and I don't want to arise any confusion. So I just simply say, once we begin to practice this teaching, and once we begin to internally become more quiet, ditching the addiction to constant psychological chatter, there is this, you can say, this inner wisdom which arises on its own, which allows you to live. Because it's not, because this is a fear that arises, right, once you're sort of disengaging from a lot of your constant thinking. It's like, how am I going to do this, how am I going to perform action, all that stuff. Whereas the more you start to disengage, the more you start to actually see that constant thinking is not required to be. Being is required to being this or that, or doing this or that, or thinking this or that. So if anything, it actually makes being more effortless. You start to recognize that constant engagement with thoughts and this chatter is what creates complexity in your life. Whereas when we remove that, life becomes more and more utterly simple. And this constant layer of suffering and this unease that we feel, this restlessness, sort of just starts vanishing. Aspect of it. So this is where you do have to trust the journey a little bit, but the more silent you become, this sort of wisdom will come, where it's like where you'll be able to be without constantly thinking.
I love that, Sunny. Yeah, I was just explaining. I had a call before our interview, and the woman was sharing with me. She said, "Well, I have all this thinking, and I don't know what to do with it." And I was like, "Well, that's a great question." It's like, what if you didn't have to do anything with it, like nothing whatsoever? And then as we dove deeper and deeper and deeper, she had the insight and the realization that when we have a lot of thought around something, it's usually because we want to control whatever that something is. So I'm going to use all this thought mechanism and this mind to try to control and manipulate the situation. And we only ever want to try to control and manipulate situations when we think that our well-being is dependent upon the outcome. And we only think our well-being is dependent upon the outcome when our power's outside of ourselves. And so she had this beautiful realization before the end of the session, where one, she recognized that she didn't have to have all this psychological thinking to get her a result or an outcome. And then two, that if she felt like it was a big decision to move on this action and to try to get this outcome, the feeling of a decision being big was directly related to the amount of thought that she had. And it's so funny. I see this like sometimes I see it with myself still, where if I feel like there's a big decision to make, usually it's just because I have a lot of thought around it. And it's really that's it. And if I have a lot of thought around it, it's just pointing to, I think that having this thing down right and getting it right is critical to my well-being, which just isn't really true. But we do this as I shouldn't say we, but humanity as I think a collective tends to go down these paths where it's like, well, what am I going to do for a career? Who am I going to marry? That's a huge decision. So I got to think about it a lot. And life kind of still happens whether our thinking's there or not.
That's sort of the conditioning, like the conditioned beliefs and the sort of standards which we believe we have to comply with,
Mm-hmm.
which creates these sorts of moments of like what we call big decisions. But here's
Yeah.
the thing, these big moments, that what the reason they're really big is because they have a lot of interest. And
Mm.
on these big decisions, yeah, you're right. There's usually this sense of having something to lose if you make the wrong decision.
Mm.
That's why we continue to constantly think of all the different scenarios. And then, you do so hard to make the right decision. And we've lived like this for so many years where we constantly try so hard to make the right decision and go over every scenario, yet still what we do end up sometimes just doesn't end up being the most optimal decision. So this
Right.
here, it shows you just the faultiness of, of this way of living. But
Mm.
like we're addicted to it. We don't want to give it up.
Right.
So thoughts have one power. The only way they're able to constantly pull you into belief, and because they must continue to keep your attention in order to perpetuate the
Right.
stream of thinking, you can
Right.
say. So they do that through interest. You can see the things that you think about the most are what you are interested in the most, the areas of life which constantly you're giving meaning to,
Mm.
significance to. And the thoughts that take your attention right away are usually thoughts where you feel like you have something to lose. That's why constant future projections where you're like, what if this doesn't turn out well? Or, how's this going to turn out? And this is where you have to rob them of that interest. You have to you have to harness your attention in a way where you're not just losing it constantly to anything, all these thoughts that just are arising spontaneously.
Mm. Mm. So I want to take it back a little bit, Suddy. What do you think then? How do you discern valuable thinking from wasteful thinking? Because there's a lot of energy. Thought is a lot of energy. I can't remember what study this was. I don't usually read too many studies these days, but I still read them every now and then just for the fun of it. And I think it said 20% of our brain, of our body's energy actually goes to our thinking. Now, obviously, that's a very big generalization, because I think for someone like yourself or me or other people who spend time in this way of being, it's very different. But how do you, is there like a filter or a mechanism or something that you check in with yourself on a daily basis to guide you in the sense of, okay, you know what, I'm kind of going down some faulty thinking here, and I just don't need to go down this train of thought anymore?
For someone who's like sort of new to this teaching, and really wants to implement it, I would simply recommend to think, right, think when you need to, right? When you're constantly in action, doing tasks, when you have to make those big decisions, think all you want. But idle moments of your day, start there. So moments of your day where, let's just say, you're getting ready, right? When you're just getting dressed, or you're taking a shower, or you're driving to work, or let's just say you're relaxing for a little bit on the couch after work. Periods of your day where thinking does not need to be happening, start there. Disengage entirely. During the periods of the day, simply don't give energy to any thought, no matter how important it may seem to be. Like, oh, now I need to think this thought. I need to actually, sort this out. During those periods of the day, be completely empty of thought. And obviously, I always recommend to everybody that I work with and all the viewers on my channel to set aside two periods of your day for at least 15 to 20 minutes each, where you're actually allocating that to meditation or self-inquiry. So in the beginning, I would just recommend, only doing this for times where there's nothing going on, and then think all you want in those times where you feel like you need to think. A person who's sort of seasoned with this teaching later on, disengage with everything. You will start to actually see how the nature of life is spontaneous. Creativity and correct action is not something that can be planned. It's not something that can be thought out. It is spontaneous. And it happens on its own, spontaneously. So, but this teaching is sort of hard to grasp and hard to implement for someone who maybe is just sort of new to this sort of teaching. So that's why I say in the beginning, just only begin with periods of your day where no thinking needs to be happening, and you will see for yourself.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, it's very interesting to me when I see myself going down some train of thought, and then as soon as I see it and have that awareness, it's like, oh, okay, I can just come back to what I'm doing. Like I was talking with one woman the other day on a call, and the best metaphor I can use is the subway station. It's like a train of thought, literally a train of thought comes in, and you either get on the train and it takes you somewhere that you never planned to go, or you're just in the subway watching the train go by. And that's the underlying fabric of life. But I think in the modern world and culture, we miss that, because I see it as looking back at like Greece, the known world. I mean, they held up reason and rationality to be above everything else and said, okay, thinking is pretty much it. If you're not rational, then you're not a human being. And that could be the start of it. I'm not really sure, but that's at least the history that I know of.
Maybe that was relevant at that time. Now you see the culture has sort of become where we have constant distraction, constant options, decisions. So the mind is always just scattered. The attention is always just scattered. And we can see for ourselves, as long as the attention is scattered, literally your circumstances, how life unfolds for you, will also reflect that scattered mind, scattered attention. So
Right.
the metaphor that you just gave, or the analogy that you just gave earlier with the train, like leaving and you realizing that you don't have to get on this train, is very, very crucial to understand. Because let's just say, even right now we're discussing this, and maybe this is very new to someone. This sort of thinking is very, very new to someone. This teaching is new to someone. And as we're discussing, a question, which is a thought, spontaneously arises. They didn't choose to have the question. They didn't choose what it's projecting, but let's just say that the question arose like, I don't get this. How does this, and this, right? Whatever it's saying. You don't have that space that we were talking about earlier, the space of seeing that this is just another thought that arose, and I don't have to get on this train. You will get on the train unconsciously.
Right.
You quite literally take on the perspective of that thought, whatever it was projecting, which is the question. Now you quite literally become the one that has a question. And now the rest of this talk will be colored from that
filter.
That filter or that projection that thought is projecting, which is, I don't get this, and this is hard to implement. So now you're literally going to be watching, like the way life is going to unfold for you is like, this is going to be difficult to understand.
Right.
I actually did a video on this recently too, like where this is showing you that how, first of all, number one, how easily a thought is able to color your entire experience.
Oh yeah.
Number two, that you don't have to buy into it. You don't have to battle against it either. You simply just take your attention away.
Right.
And that just makes it vanish. That's it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah, it's really cool to see, I think, in this line of work, when people's thinking just starts to dissolve. I was working with a man, this was about 2 weeks ago, and he came to me and he was like, I had all these questions, but for whatever reason, now that we're here, I just don't have any more questions. And I'm like, yeah, that's usually how it works, because just the energy that you embody just kind of allows those layers to fall away.
Usually the calls that I do for my program, for my coaching members, we usually on those calls get to a certain point where we have gone to such great depth into actually clearly seeing this, not thinking about it, but actually clearly seeing the truth of this, that from that point, it doesn't even make sense to ask a question, because it is seen that this itself is just another, sort of thought trying to lure you into confusion. And that's a great power, because, especially throughout the spiritual journey, so many confusions arise, so many fears arise. and we buy into them. Because we buy into them, they continue to color our experience, and we are the ones that like continue to create these obstacles into this sort of clear seeing, into this growth and development. Whereas once we start to acknowledge this, that these thoughts and these questions and these fears can simply be discarded, taken attention away from.
Mm-hmm.
Now your journey itself is a lot smoother.
Beautiful. Yeah. Sunny, can we talk a little bit about your perspective on energy? I'm curious about this. When it comes to feeling settle energy, things like this, what's your thoughts on that? What's your thoughts around settle energy, feeling the underlying fabric and life force energy of life?
Subtle energy?
So,
yeah, could you go into it?
Yeah, so I guess what I'll say is I'll feel, in my experience, sometimes when I'm working with people or connecting with someone, I'll feel at some level there's something energetic, like somatically. I'll actually feel the waves, you could call them vibes, whatever you want to call it, feel settle vibrations. I think in the yogic tradition they call it vrittis. Vrittis are the ripples created within the screen of consciousness that come from thought. So I just wanted to hear your opinion and your thoughts on that. What do you sense that, or is it for you just all encapsulating? How do you experience that? Do you experience that subtle energetics?
I think everybody does, it doesn't matter if you're into sort of you're discovering spiritual teachings or not. Everybody, even the term is actually quite popular, like I don't like your vibe, or I like your vibe. Right. What are we really referring to is just this subtle intuition of another person's character, or another person, the way they like their energy, sort of, which is, you can't put words to it. You can try to describe it, but it's just something. It's like an intuition. So yes, I would say that that everybody feels it. Now, the teaching that I've been really going deeper into, the Advaita teaching, would actually say that this sort of energy, because sometimes when we start to talk about this, then we become really conscious of, I want to be rid of the negative energy, and I don't want to go anywhere. There's sort of like anywhere I can be affected in a negative way. This teaching would say that you yourself can only be affected if you yourself consider yourself to be an object of awareness, which means body, or the bundle of thoughts that you consider yourself to be, this personal identity. All this is perceived, not only what you consider yourself to be, this bundle of thoughts, these emotions, this body, but also what you're calling external and all these feelings and energies. All of it is perceived.
Right.
You are simply the seer of it. Simply the awareness of it, the background or the screen upon which all of this play of manifestation is occurring.
Right.
So just like the screen cannot be affected or damaged or hindered in any way by the image being projected on it. For example, a movie screen which is portraying a scene of fire or war, that scene is not damaging the screen. In that way, awareness is the screen on which whatever play of energy is occurring is simply arising and subsiding within it. It's simply coming and going. And the awareness of it, which is your essential nature, remains undamaged, unaffected.
So, Sunny, there's, I think I can't remember what tradition it is, but they call it the bindu, the space from which the screen is projected on. And it's really interesting. I was studying one culture 2 years ago where they actually take their hair. So the bindu is thought to be like right here within the consciousness of the body. Like if you were to close your eyes and then focus on that point and allow subtle energy flow to that point, then that's like the actual point of projection into physicality, or what we call as physicality, the screen. This is really, really out there, but how do you see a person pull back from the identification with the screen and get back to their origin point?
It only has to do with depriving the mind of identity, of belief. It really is that simple. And this is the path of Jnana Yoga, which itself is not a path. It is to simply be quiet here and now, not just for, like, quiet, externally, but also internally, depriving the mind of constant energy, constant restlessness.
Yep.
Simply by seeing this, by turning the attention inward, or more accurately, relaxing the attention from going outward, you come to know your essential nature, that which is aware of all that you're aware of. Because throughout your life, attention has always been outward. In your waking state, attention is always outward, onto thoughts, onto feelings, onto objects, onto circumstances, people. And this attention constantly being outward is what is creating this subject-object relationship, this separation, this sense of being an individual entity. And it is keeping you in a state of seeing yourself only as just this body and just the bundle of thoughts.
Right.
You don't need to go into any sort of complex practice or, like a 5-step discipline or whatever, where, those may be relevant for certain developmental reasons. But if the Jnana Yoga is the direct path, or self-inquiry is the direct path, which is simply turning the attention back inward, relaxing it inward. So rather than the attention always being on something, become aware that you are aware. Acknowledging the fact that you are aware. In this, even if it's in the beginning, just a second, just a moment, attention in that moment is no longer outward onto something. It just, you can say, it relaxes into its source, and that is the acknowledging, I am aware, I am alive, I am. Stay here. Your attention will continue to go outwards again and again. Just bring it back, and conduct life in this way.
Beautiful.
This itself is enough. And that's why, there's so much significance on I am. Not the words. What are the words pointing to? They're pointing to an experience, your own quality of being alive, being aware. So instead of living your day constantly being aware of something, of being this or that, just be aware that you are aware. Be aware of being. And this is enough.
Beautiful. Yeah. It's really cool to recognize once the natural state, like our natural state, at least how I see it, is that awareness and that rest and no thought. Like that I believe is our actual natural state, is ease. Like dis-ease is when we're not at ease and when things have accumulated in the body. But our natural state, I see it as a space of no thought, beingness, human being, not human doing. And I think the mind, through modern world, modern development, as we're growing and evolving as a species, but also as a planet, there's more levels of complexity. And because of those levels of complexity, I think a lot of individuals have lost free reign of their mind, in the sense that, like, when we look at even the development of science, it's, I'm going to use my mind to plan, project, and create things outside of myself to navigate the physical material world, which is incredibly valuable for mastering the material world. But I get, my sense is that a lot of humanity lost their natural state around when that happened as well too, because they started looking at everything as future. Like, I see the mind as something that it's a tool outside of ourselves that we can turn off and on, that it's like an on switch. Okay, I need to use thought to do some planning today. Okay, I'm turning it on, I'm going to do some planning. Cool, I'm turning it off. But I think at somewhere along the lines of our evolutionary path as human beings, it got hacked. And I'm just making generalizations here, obviously, but it got hacked and it was just always on for some people. That's not my experience anymore. At one point it was in my life. But for some individuals, it's just, and it's always creating realities that, or subjective fake realities that aren't real, coloring our perception. And then we interact with those projected realities because that's what we think the world or what people are like, but it's actually not.
You can say that like the external complexity of the world and the increasing complexity of the world
Mm-hmm.
is simply a reflection of the complexity which we are entertaining internally, right? So that's why you see a rise in the everybody's now, rather than people having sort of physical problems that like before we used to have sort of, if you look at history, before we used to have physical problems that we thought things would solve. We needed life to become easier and more convenient. Now this sort of created an interest in material culture where we thought money and things and having more of this and that would make me happy, And now we have pretty much everything, but now our problem is different. It's mental, it's psychological, where now that we have everything that we believe we needed, we're still not happy. If anything, we're actually more stressed, more fearful, more at unease. So that's why now more than ever, it's like it's needed for you to go within, because if the answer is not just accumulating things and better things, which still most of the world is in the chase of, because we haven't realized that yet fully, but the ones who have been fortunate enough to have the things and then realize, damn, this is still not really bringing me that happiness, and I believe, and I really hope everybody has that at least once in their life, where you really accomplish what you want to accomplish and get what you want to get, even materially, even if it's the most like physical, like a car or house or whatever, and you see that this still doesn't put you to peace. This still doesn't, this still continues to perpetuate that restlessness. So now more than ever, because of the stress and the fear, we need to go within, because it's the only option left. So in a way, the suffering and the restlessness of the world is sort of leading you to this. So in a way, it is beautiful,
Yeah, I love that. It's the best way that I say this is we're all walking each other back home, and some of us are just going at different paces and spaces. Some of us are going at different speeds, but I think in the end it's all pretty much headed towards the same direction, which is that space of peace and that space of, oh, this is my natural being.
It's just to recognize yourself as you are, so who is going at a different speed? This is the one that begins the journey, but in the journey recognizes its non-existence, because there's a sense, I am this person working towards this spiritual goal or whatever, but that is the spiritual teaching itself. It is to recognize that the person is not what I am, so it is to simply recognize that you already are what you are, and so the search for remedies is what ceases.
Right. The search ends. The quest for enlightenment, or the quest for, all the spiritual things. I always remind people, at least when I have my programs and courses, and they bring up the topic of spirituality, I always remind them that spirituality it's just a way of being. Like, it's not actually it's a concept when you give it a word, but in essence, it's really just your relationship to the world, your relationship to what you call as yourself, and the quality of your life. And if it's spirituality isn't making your experience more enjoyable or peaceful, then throw it out. because it's not the real thing.
Yeah, you can say it's just life. We could just say it's life.
Yeah.
So if you are going into the teaching and you still, some people are like, I've been practicing this for years and they're still not working and all that stuff. And there's always, you can really pick apart all the reasons. Number one thing that I see is just a lack of consistency and of application of what you are learning. So it's really good to read and watch videos and really hear all about the teaching. But if they remain just mental concepts, it will do no good, really.
Right.
Consistent application is quite literally the only thing that is required of what you're learning, of what you're coming across, because you will continue to come across what is relevant for you, what you are sort of ready for. Sometimes you may come across things that you are not ready for, but they will plant a seed in you, which sort of makes you, which opens your mind in to a whole different avenue. So even like anybody that's on this live right now and us right now, and anything that is being brought up is sort of exactly what you need to hear at this time, or something that is relevant for you to hear, to sort of open the mind up in a certain way, to really lure you to a different path. All that's required is for you to the best of your ability, apply what you find interesting, what you trust might work. Trust is obviously needed, because without trust, without faith, you can't even take one step.
Right.
But through consistent application, soon trust won't be needed. It will truly be replaced by inner conviction of the truth of the teaching.
Yeah, it just becomes your next way of being. It becomes who you are.
Absolutely.
Sonny, I want to ask maybe one or two more questions, and then are you okay if we go to some Q&A?
Absolutely, yeah.
Awesome. Guys, if you have any questions for Sonny or I, please feel free to share them up in the comment section, and we'll look at those and we'll bring you on here. So if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, feel free to share them in the comment section. Sonny, what do you see as and I already kind of know your response to this, or at least I think I do, and I get a sense of it, but what do you think is the end goal of someone's life?
We can't necessarily say end goal, but just the most significant opportunity that we have in this lifetime is to know what I am. Throughout your life, you've been constantly referring to yourself as I am this, like I'm doing this, I'm feeling this. And there's a sense of this me being continuous, being changeless. Yet everything you consider yourself to be, for example, this body, your personality, your looks, your hairstyle, your way of clothing, your belief systems, all these things have never remained constant. They have always changed. They're always just bouncing from one to the other. And so right now, whatever belief system you have, whatever way you look, whatever, you consider to be yourself, you so intimately feel as myself. But literally 10 years pass, or even a year passes, and you look back, and sometimes you're like, how could I have believed this? Or how could I have thought this? Or how could I have had that hairstyle? Or so you're looking at it where it's like a whole different person. But during that time, it felt so intimately as myself. We just take it for granted. We never look deeper into this. So we just believe that this self is changeful. Yet there is a sense of me being continuous, me being changeless. I remain, whereas all of these things, which I call myself, change. So self-inquiry and all spirituality is actually pointing you to the one constant in all of your experience, in all of your life. Even when you were 10 years old, running around in a park with you had a whole different body, right? A whole different belief system, whole different set of thoughts you were thinking or how you were feeling. Yet the only thing that was similar from now, right here, to that 10-year-old self, 10-year-old Jared, was this sense, I. The sense of me.
Mm.
You can also say the sense of now.
So,
Everything was different. The only thing that was constant was this sense, me.
mhm.
So the spiritual teaching, or you can say the greatest opportunity that, in this lifetime, the greatest goal is to bring to light, what is this I? What is this me? To discover what this really is. Because anything that we build in the world is constantly changing, constantly being taken away.
Mhm.
So it only takes you experiencing a lot of this, that like nothing I build, nothing I achieve lasts. Even things that I invest so much sense of self in doesn't last.
Mhm.
Now let me look to something that lasts,
Mhm.
something that is changeless and stable. And that is you can say, the greatest opportunity.
I love that. Yeah. I think the Buddha refers to that state as the groundless ground. It's like you
Yeah.
can't go deeper. Once you put your security, or once you just have the realization of the truth of your beingness and you ground there, it's yeah, it's groundless in the sense that it's never changing, and it's the only thing that will never change. At the same time, it's that can be scary for a lot of people. I know when I fell into that space, truly, that was pretty terrifying. And I kind of fell in, jumped back, fell in, jumped back, fell in, jumped back. And as far as I know, I pretty much live there, because sometimes I actually consciously try to get out of it, and it doesn't even. I'm like, and then I start laughing at myself when I see what I'm doing. So I think I think it's a really it's a falling into. I think that's the best way to put it. Maybe is a falling back into.
And recognizing that you are always there, so this sense of falling in and having one foot in and one foot out, or going in and out, it is what's also sort of dissipates and is seen to be unreal, just a movement within mind, as you continue to consistently apply the teaching.
Beautiful, beautiful. Sonny, do you want to bring? We can bring up some questions here.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I'm going to scroll up to the top here and see who we got. Let's see. I'm going to go to V. Aran. This is a very basic question, but I think it's valuable. How do I deal with toxic people?
I would say, to the greatest degree that you can, fully disengage. Don't
Yeah.
fight back. Don't give energy to. It is because they hook your energy, just like thoughts. It is because those sorts of provocative people hook your energy, when they provoke you, it continues to sort of link your energy to them, deprive them of attention, deprive them of reaction to the greatest degree that you can. And simply create this sort of attitude where you're moving through life not being bothered, because we continue to also be bothered by toxic people, or these sorts of people. We continue there's a sense of interest there.
Right.
Interest isn't just positive, it's also negative. Things that we fear, things that we are anxious about, there's interest there. So
Right.
as long as there is interest, there's a link. You will see that as soon as you break this interest, as soon as you continue to just deprive anything in your life of attention, it naturally falls away over time.
Beautiful. I love that response. It's why I tell people never to pay attention to politics. It's like, look, just let it die. Like whatever you don't like about the world, just stop giving it attention, and it will die with. It'll either die in the world, or it will die within your consciousness, and either way, you win. Yeah.
Absolutely. And anything politically, honestly, I would say disengage to a large degree. And anything that is really, relevant for you to find out, you will find out from a close family, like member or a friend, always.
Yeah.
You ain't missing out much.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go to Lucas's question here. He says, could you please tell us some examples you've achieved while using trans-surfing techniques? If it's not too personal, of course. Is he talking about trans-surfing reality? Is that?
Yeah, so Reality Transurfing is a book by Vadim Zeland. It really is just another model, a structure for sort of you can say how to achieve your goals, really, but I would say in a deeper way, how to conduct yourself in life. So it's just another model, and I would say it's really beneficial for people who are more sort of scientific minded, and who are constantly looking for proofs of like of the teachings before they try it. So that's why it's such a long book. But I remember, in the beginning of this process for me, that was what resonated with me the most, and I really went all in on that teaching and really started to live by that teaching. So I would say that teaching was really, really helpful in me finding clarity in life and disengaging from a lot of the things that I wanted to achieve or be or do in this world for wrong reasons. So I will say this: certain goals that we have are so conditioned by society and just regular world conditioning. So many things we want to achieve or do in order to prove people wrong or in order to prove our worth or feel worthy. All of these goals are not really things that we truly want, so that book really allowed me to wake up to so many things that I was subscribed to, so many belief systems, so many desires that were draining my energy, yet I didn't actually care for them. I just wanted to prove someone wrong or prove myself, my own worth and all this stuff. So it allowed me to disengage from that and really, so when you remove all the stuff that you are just engaged in that is not serving you, what do you discover? What you actually care for, So once you get rid of all the complexity, the only thing that's there is just your actual expression, clarity. So it really allowed me to keep my process very simple, wake up to my purpose, and build personal mastery quests from the ground up, to build that to do what I really love and earn a living from it, to live in this world in a sort of effortless manner, to learn to deal with problems and relationships, everything. So that book really was significant for me. It totally changed my way of being. So I would say that my channel, my business, everything, it really built on those values, which now the teaching I've gone into is even deeper than I would say transurfing. But it definitely was very, very good in the beginning.
Beautiful, definitely. Yeah, I think that's more of like in the school of manifestation. I always look at now the space that people are coming from, what's filled their inner space, and with their questions or with their concerns, you can see the space that they're coming from, and it's like, well, that's not you. That's clearly someone else, and I can see it. and I think that's really valuable to point out as coaches. And when I say the term coaches, I really just mean people who are aware of all these things. Yeah,
absolutely.
Let's see what other questions we got here. Noha says, how can you help someone to be aware of the role they're playing? It's a great question.
I'm not actually sure if I understand it. Could I hear your interpretation of the question?
Yeah, sure. So I think what they mean is, let's say a person's still playing out a big brother role or a mentor role or a mother role. And I see this in my line of work all the time. People grow up together maybe, and they have they're playing these both roles. And then someone starts to outgrow or outdevelop that, and the other person is still down here thinking like, but you're my brother, but I'm your son, or you're my father, and why aren't you showing up in the way that you're showing up, that you're supposed to show up to, because they're in a role. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say all these things that we feel we have to become aware of or heal about ourselves or fix, I would actually say the only remedy to these things is not to go, looking and trying to find these things within yourself. Just become silent internally. And I know, so that's the simplicity of this teaching, where once you are learning to disengage from the scattered mind, the constant psychological thinking, all these things which are subtle, all these things which you have to heal, and all these things, like, they just automatically arise and are acknowledged. They are still arising probably, but they're just in an ocean of thoughts and a scattered attention that you do not acknowledge them. So once you are becoming still, quite literally, everything will arise that you need to sort of process through and disengage from and heal from. Don't worry about that. That's why I say, don't even necessarily worry about in this path to constantly try to figure out the next step to try to make something happen. Just inwardly become still more and more to the best of your ability, and externally just tend to the needs of this moment. Do what is required of you, and you will see that life sort of reels you into this journey, into the deepening of this journey, into the development of your character, into your own spiritual growth. So keep it simple, become more and more still, and all these things will arise. And when they are acknowledged, the unconscious link with them is broken. You do not need to do something about it or try to do something to get rid of it. Simply bringing something that is unconscious within you to the light of your observation and acknowledging it breaks the link. Because to suffer consciously is stupidity, and no one wants to suffer. No one suffers consciously. We only suffer because there's an unconscious sort of tendency or behavior, and silence will take care of it.
Beautiful. Are you okay if I add something to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So what I've seen in my work is I see that people get still within themselves and their roles, the thinking that occupied that role. So maybe they had a role as a mother, or maybe they had a role as a business owner, or a role at whatever role that they're playing in life and that life's asking to them. When they start dissolving and getting quiet within themselves, the role tends to start to fall away as well too. And then other people are like, where's that, but they're not being my brother, they're not being my employer, they're not being my so what I found at least helpful in terms of individuals as they get quiet within themselves and all those roles start dissolving within your consciousness, I have found it useful to speak to the other person in terms of creating more harmony and peace all around. I have found it useful to point to the realization of the role breaking. Like the roles are changing, the roles are shifting, the roles are breaking, and I found it really useful to let people know that that's actually happening. I call the distinction expectation versus agreements. Like when people grow up in certain families or society or whatever, everyone has these roles that they're playing and people are just expecting them to play these roles. And then when you start getting quiet within yourself, I found that the roles start to dissolve because the thoughts around the roles dissolve. And so what I found really useful in my own practice is to let those individuals know that the role is that you're no longer playing that role, and that you can't get them to be aware, obviously, but you can point to the fact that they're playing a role. And if you want to come to a new agreement for the relationship, because I have found that even in my own personal life, but also in the lives of my clients, when I just allowed everything to fall away, I actually did damage to some of my relationships in the sense of that was I put myself in a harder space than I needed to by just letting it all fall away. So I do encourage people personally that if there's a role that's falling away because your thinking is falling away, that's great. Allow it to dissolve. But it's also helpful to communicate to other people that you're no longer playing that role. And that if you still want to maintain a relationship, you can, but you'll have to come to an agreement as to how that new role, how the new relationship will function. And I found that was something that I wished I was told, at least when I was going through a space that I'm guessing Noha might be going through. So I just wanted to add that.
Absolutely. Relationship is like a living, breathing thing. There's no full standards.
Mm-hmm.
You have to sort of, find your own balance with this as well. But you can say if you're going deeper into this teaching and becoming still and really establishing your sense of self and your true essential being, then you can play whatever role you're playing without being immersed into it. So you gain the quality to see instead of staring, you see? So you can play any role without so much interest and investigation. I mean,
Yeah, immersion or identification with.
identification. That was the word that I was going
Right.
for.
Beautiful. I don't think, like, I know for me, I started really doing leaps and bounds in my states of consciousness, and I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I was changing, and some of my family members and some of the people who are close in my life really didn't know what was happening either, but they were so identified with those old roles. And when they saw that I wasn't fitting into them anymore, naturally they got a little bit upset or concerned or worried. And so I do find a value in
Yeah.
communicating that for sure.
Mhm.
Beautiful. Let's see if there's anything else here. Nope. They say thank you. Great answer. Well,
Perfect.
Sonny, I've really appreciated this time that we spent together. Thanks so much for doing this with me. It's been a real honor and a real delight to share this space with you and share my community with you and vice versa. I always love asking this question at the end because I think it's really valuable for people, and it's also just comes from a place of excitement and curiosity for me. If you were to die this evening or maybe in a couple hours, what's the last things that you would share with the world? If you had, maybe 2 minutes to share something with the world, what would that be?
I'll keep it very, very simple. I will say focus on I am. Bring
Mm.
the attention to I am. That's literally it. And for those who this doesn't make sense and they're like, that's it, it's not relevant. Then let it be. Let it be. Discard it. But for some for whom it intrigues interest, it is relevant for you. Take it all the way. You know.
Awesome. Beautiful. I love it. Sonny, are you doing any programs or anything like this right now?
Yeah, so I'm doing one main program, which is called the Higher Consciousness Shift. And the purpose of that is to dissolve mind identification by deepening your meditation and self-inquiry and really returning to that natural peace.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Really cool. Yeah, guys, check that out. I put links in the YouTube description boxes. I also have some free content and some stuff around awakening to life as well too. So feel free to check out what Sonny and I have created, and we'd be delighted to share it with you. Thanks so much for joining, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sonny. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.